I guess it all starts with Mr. and Mrs. B having a cottage not far from the bar in the early 60s. Mr. B had a terrible childhood living with people who took him in after his poor little Irish mother bore him. He was reminded at all times that he was a bastard, a complete sinner. The parents were Bible thumpers. The children were beaten if they went swimming on Sunday. Well, that's one example of what was considered an infraction or sin. Beatings were a part of daily life in the household. The father took the kids out to the barn for a strapping. The mother stood by and had to make him stop after a certain length of time because he was apt to get carried away and probably would have beaten them to death if he had his druthers. The chilling yet brutal childhood memories haunted poor Mr. B all his life. He found out early that liquor eased the pain and helped him forget. You could say this awful thirst was his legacy from these terrible people. Hence, he and the family spent many an hour at the Maryville Tavern. Linda had fond memories of the place as a child. It was a cozy watering hole, more like a snug than what was known in these days as a beer parlor. When she left her quadriplegic husband, a nasty piece of work he was, and Toronto, she decided she wanted to live in that area where she had spent so many summers as a child. She had various jobs working as a bartender, but her heart was set on working at the Maryville Tavern, and soon she found herself employed there. Mr. and Mrs. York, who had owned the place for almost 50 years, were getting tired, and it wasn't long before Linda had an opportunity to buy the place. She was hesitant to undertake the business on her own. Donna, her cousin, was living with her, sponging more like it, and she offered her a 50% interest. It took a year or two to Linda to realize that Donna was stealing the business blind. Not wanting to believe her own lying eyes, she hired a detective, and he very soon had the evidence on videotape. When confronted, Donna lied. She walked out of the business taking as much of Linda's stuff as she could. The washer and dryer, to name two of the bigger ticket items. And then she held Linda hostage. She would not sign over her shares of the business unless Linda paid her $25,000. This didn't include the additional monies that would have to be paid to the PSD and GST boys. The messy dissolve of the partnership alerted them to trouble. They came in, audited the books, checked the liquor sales, and guesstimated all she had purchased off the license, and nailed her with a huge bill. About a year to pay it off. Now, Linda could have gone to the police, but because this was a relative, she was reluctant to do so. And even if she did, the police are not that interested in white-collar crimes. It would have been very costly and messy to take this sorry tale to court. That's where Larry, Pepper, and yours truly came into the picture. We paid Donna off and then started with a new set of problems. Larry had enough after 8 months, and we paid him out. He's a great guy with a great work ethic. He had a day job at the cement factory, a noisy Flintstone environment, driving a forklift truck throughout all the dust and rubble, and then at night he'd come and do maintenance at the bar. He was always working on other jobs too. A real go-getter, really. He started to resent that Pepper's only function seemed to be lifting his elbow and telling the patrons that he was the new owner. Pepper, the schmoozer. Pepper ended up drinking every night at the bar, and he took to staying upstairs. He lived there for about 6 months. His room was a real hellhole. No sheets on the beds, no bed covers at all, filthy work clothes, and discarded beer bottles strewn all over. He wasn't above bringing little sluts or us from Toronto there either. Their biological needs must have been real great. How attractive can a gnarly little bald guy, glasses, always suffering from some kind of allergy, hence rashes, sniffles, etc., still in his dirty work clothes and inevitably drunk at closing time be? He sometimes invaded Linda's space up there too. Several times she found his cronies pass out on her bed. Once he dragged an old hoe type up to Linda's room. She'd fallen off a bar stool, laying on the floor looking definitely comatose. The patrons urged Pep to carry her upstairs, where he plunked her in Linda's boudoir. Thankfully, she came around about 14 hours later. Although Pepper is only 34 years old, he looks much older. One really wonders what Feather sees in him. He met her at a party in Belleville. And the next morning, he was still living upstairs then, he told Linda and I that he met an interesting woman but couldn't remember her name. All he knew was that she lived and worked in Taiwa. If it wasn't for Linda figuring out who she was, they may never have hooked up. As you know, Feather is a recovering alcoholic. Hasn't touched a drop in at least 10 years, but she is what is known as a dry drunk. She still has the same problems the drinkers do. She's got a real bad attitude. Shortly after their meeting, Pep and Feather set up house together, or rather, he moved into her house. He was still coming into the bar every night. Well, he had to say she doesn't allow any alcohol in her home. She'd sit at his side drinking one Sprite after another. How much fun can that be, watching your boyfriend get drunk while you are stone cold sober? Then they started plotting to get Linda out of the bar. I am using the word plotting very loosely. How these two, with guinea pig-like brains, thought they could oust Linda when she owned 51% of the shares is baffling. But try they did by badgering, bad-mouthing, and finally boycotting the bar. That last little ploy shows how dumb our Pepper really is. Talk about cutting off your nose, despite your ugly face. He and his pals would drive by the tavern and its empty parking lot every night to tipple at the scrounge. One thing you'll have to understand about the Maryville Tavern is that it's a cavernous, barren bar, a haven for scrubbers in town, only minimally busy expecting when welfare checks arrived. They'd have a flurry of thirsty social service clients, not a class of people with a lot of class. They live in a town that has more or less died, where there is no zip industry. I don't even think there is a zip code. The town's main source of income is welfare. There's a zillion little corner stores on the main street, and you see people standing in them, ripping apart pull-tab tickets all day long. Tales from the Maryville Tavern, to be continued.